I never expected a simple visit to my friend's house would leave me remembering his mother's whisper, "Don't tell him you stayed longer." I hadn't planned on arriving early. My friend had asked me to stop by, and I assumed he'd be home by the time I got there. Instead, when I knocked on the door, it was his mother who answered. She looked surprised for a moment, then quickly smiled, the kind of smile that felt practiced in hospitality, yet carried a warmth that made it hard not to notice. She was in her early 40s, graceful in a way that spoke more of composure than effort. Her hair was loosely pinned back, a few strands falling forward in a way that framed her face. "Come in," she said, stepping aside. Her hand brushed lightly against my arm as I passed, just a fleeting contact, but enough to leave a trace of warmth on my skin. The house smelled like fresh coffee and something faintly sweet, as if she'd been baking earlier. I followed her into the living room, where the late afternoon light poured through the curtains, softening the edges of the room. It gave everything, the sofa, the books stacked on the side table, even her presence, a quieter glow. "Sorry," I said as I sat down. "I thought he'd be back by now." She shook her head with a small laugh. "He always runs late. You know how he is." Her voice carried that blend of exasperation and affection only a parent could manage, though I caught a note of something else in it too, a kind of resignation maybe. She offered me tea or coffee, and I agreed without much thought, more to fill the silence than out of thirst. A few moments later, she returned with 2 mugs, the steam curling up in little wisps between us. When she handed mine over, her fingers brushed mine, not deliberately, but not clumsy either. Just natural. Just ordinary. At least, that's what I told myself. I watched as she settled into the chair across from me. She sat with a kind of poise that made every movement look intentional, the way she crossed her legs, the way her hand rested against the armrest, fingers tapping absently as if to an invisible rhythm. We talked about small things at first, the weather, her work, how quiet the neighborhood had been lately. She asked me about my own job, about my family. Nothing extraordinary. And yet, I found myself watching the way her lips curved when she smiled, or the way her eyes seemed to soften when she listened. There was nothing overt in the air, no reason to feel unsettled. But still, I noticed how the cushions of the sofa seemed to hold onto her warmth when she leaned forward to set her mug down. I noticed the subtle trace of vanilla perfume that seemed to linger whenever she moved. And though I tried to focus on the casual rhythm of our conversation, a small thought had already planted itself in the back of my mind, that maybe this evening would turn out to be different from what I expected. At first, it was the kind of small talk you fall into out of politeness. She asked how my classes were going, and I asked how work had been for her. We exchanged little observations about the city, about traffic, about the kind of trivial things that usually fill the gaps in waiting. But the longer we talked, the less it felt like small talk and the more it felt like something else, like she wasn't just asking questions to pass the time, but because she actually wanted to hear my answers. I noticed it in the way her eyes stayed on mine when I spoke, steady and unhurried. She wasn't glancing at her phone, or distracted by the clock. She was fully present, and that kind of attention has a weight to it. It makes every word feel more important than it should. At one point, she asked me how my family was doing. I told her about my younger sister, how she'd just started college and was nervous about it. She listened closely, nodding, her expression softening as if she remembered what it was like to be that age, standing on the edge of everything. "She'll find her way," she said, her voice calm and certain, like someone who had weathered storms and knew the skis always cleared. And then, naturally, I asked her how she was doing. Not as my friend's mom, not as the woman hosting me in her living room, but as a person. Her smile faltered for a fraction of a second, just long enough for me to catch it before she gathered it back up. "I am fine," she said at first. But then she added quietly, "The house feels different these days. Quieter. I suppose that's what happens when children grow up." There was no sadness in her tone exactly, but something about the way she looked down at her mug before taking another sip told me it wasn't an easy quiet. It was the kind that echoed. I wanted to say something comforting, something that might ease the weight I suddenly sensed in her words. But nothing seemed right. So instead, I simply nodded and held her gaze when she looked back up at me. Sometimes silence says more than any reply. She must have felt it too, because the air shifted between us. Not dramatically, just subtly. The kind of shift you only notice when you're paying attention. Her laughter, when it came again, seemed lighter, as if she'd let me glimpse a truth she usually kept tucked away. She leaned a little closer when she spoke now, her hand occasionally brushing against the table as if to punctuate her words. I caught the faint vanilla of her perfume again, stronger this time, and it lingered with each breath. It struck me then how strange it was, sitting there with her, talking so easily, as if the years between us and the labels of friend and mother didn't quite fit the moment we were sharing. And maybe that was the first time I felt the beginning of something I couldn't yet name. The conversation had been flowing easily, words spilling into the quiet house like a stream over stones. But after a while it slowed, not from awkwardness, but from something else, as if both of us were content to let the pauses stretch, to sit inside the stillness and notice each other more clearly. She had moved from her chair to the sofa, settling just a little closer to where I sat. At first, I thought nothing of it. The cushions dipped slightly with her weight, her knee bending toward mine as she angled herself comfortably. It was a small shift, but I felt it immediately, the nearness of her presence, the warmth that seemed to radiate in the space between us. I tried to focus on the room instead. The clock on the wall ticked with patient rhythm, the kind of sound you don't notice until everything else grows quiet. Through the half-drawn curtains, the last of the daylight slipped away, the sky outside turning to muted shades of blue and gray. Somewhere in the kitchen, the faint hum of the refrigerator carried on steadily, as if it was the only witness to what was unfolding. She asked me something, I don't even remember what, and when I answered, I realized my voice was lower than before, softer, almost hesitant. It felt wrong to speak too loudly in that moment, as though raising my voice would break something delicate between us. Her hand rested on the sofa cushion, just inches from mine. I could feel the heat of it without touching, that subtle pull of awareness that made it impossible to relax my own hand. My fingers tingled with the thought of how close they were to hers, and I had to remind myself to keep them still. Then she looked at me. Not the way someone looks when they're listening, but the way someone looks when they're searching, as though she wanted to know something she couldn't quite ask aloud. Our eyes held for just a second too long, and in that extra beat, I felt the air shift again, heavier now, fuller. I told myself to glance away, to let the moment pass, but I didn't. Instead, I let myself notice the tiny details I'd been pretending not to see, the faint lines at the corners of her eyes when she smiled, the way her lips parted slightly as if she was about to speak, the glimmer of light in her dark irises. The silence stretched, and yet it wasn't empty. It was alive, pulsing with something neither of us dared name. My chest tightened, not with fear exactly, but with the awareness that we had wandered into a space that ordinary conversations don't reach. She finally exhaled softly, breaking the moment without breaking it entirely. Her fingers tapped once against the cushion, and though she didn't move closer, she didn't pull away either. And in that pause, in the quiet of her living room with the clock ticking and the night settling in, I realized I was no longer just waiting for my friend to arrive. I was waiting to see what this silence might turn into. The silence didn't last forever. She was the first to break it, her voice soft, almost thoughtful, as if speaking more to herself than to me. "You know," she said, her eyes fixed on the rim of her coffee mug, "this house feels so different these days. Too quiet, if I am honest." Her words seemed simple, but there was something in the way she said them, the faint hesitation, the sigh hidden beneath her tone, that made me listen differently. She wasn't talking about silence as a matter of sound. She was talking about silence as a kind of emptiness. I leaned forward slightly, my elbows resting on my knees, as if the angle of my body might somehow bring me closer to what she was trying to share. "I can imagine," I said carefully, not wanting to intrude, but not wanting to let the moment slip away. Her lips curved into a small smile, but it wasn't a happy one. It was the kind of smile people wear when they don't want to admit how much something hurts. She glanced toward the hallway, as though remembering the years when it had echoed with noise, with laughter, with footsteps, with her son calling out. It's strange, she continued, how quickly things change. One day you are busy, constantly needed. Then suddenly, you are standing in the kitchen and realizing you're cooking for one. Her voice wavered slightly on the last word, just enough for me to feel it lodge inside me. I didn't know what to say. What words could possibly soften the weight of years shifting so suddenly? So instead, I stayed quiet. I kept my eyes on her, letting her see that I was there, that I wasn't retreating into polite distance. And maybe that was enough, because her shoulders eased slightly, as if relieved she didn't have to mask everything. Without thinking, my hand moved. Slowly, almost cautiously, I reached out and let my fingers touch hers where they rested on the sofa cushion. For a heartbeat, I thought she might pull away. But she didn't. Instead, her hand shifted just slightly, her palm turning so that my fingers rested more securely against hers. The contact was small, almost invisible to anyone else, but to me it felt like an entire world had opened in that touch. Her skin was warm, soft, steady, a quiet anchor in the middle of everything unspoken between us. She drew in a breath, her eyes meeting mine again. There was no fear there, no reprimand, only a stillness, as though she had been waiting for someone to notice the truth beneath her carefully kept composure. Thank you, she said at last, her voice barely above a whisper. For what? I asked, my own voice hushed. For listening. And in that moment, it wasn't about age or roles or the fact that I was her son's friend. It was about two people sitting in the same room, recognizing loneliness in each other, and allowing a fragile thread of closeness to form between them. The house was still quiet. But somehow, with her hand resting lightly against mine, the silence didn't feel empty anymore. Just as I was beginning to wonder how much longer we would be waiting, my phone buzzed. It was a message from my friend, running late. Don't head out, I'll be there soon. I glanced up from the screen, uncertain whether to stay or make an excuse. But before I could speak, she caught my expression and asked, "Is he not coming yet?" I nodded, holding up the phone. He said he'll be late. Her lips curved into a small, knowing smile, though there was a flicker of something else in her eyes, something I couldn't quite name. Then, she said softly, almost teasing, "I suppose you'll just have to keep me company a little longer." It wasn't the words themselves, but the way she said them. There was a lilt in her voice, a gentleness that made the simple suggestion feel charged. My chest tightened as I nodded, though my heart beat faster than it should have. The conversation drifted on, but it had changed somehow. It wasn't about filling time anymore. It was slower, softer, punctuated by silences that neither of us rushed to fill. We sat side by side on the sofa now, not across from each other. Our shoulders didn't touch, but they could have, and that closeness seemed to hum with its own quiet electricity. At one point, she leaned toward me, brushing at the sleeve of my shirt. "Lint," she said with a faint smile, but her fingers lingered a moment longer than they needed to. It was the kind of small gesture no one else would notice, but I felt the warmth of her touch long after her hand returned to her lap. The house itself seemed to join in the moment. The overhead light was dim, casting everything in a warm glow that softened edges and blurred details. The curtains swayed slightly with the evening breeze coming in through a cracked window, carrying with it the faint scent of jasmine from the garden outside. And beneath it all, the quiet hum of the refrigerator was the only sound marking the passage of time. I became hyper-aware of every small detail, the way she tucked her hair behind her ear, the way her laughter rose and then faded into silence, the way her eyes seemed to linger on me when she thought I wasn't looking. We talked about nothing in particular, old movies, favorite books, little moments from the past. But beneath every word was the awareness that we were no longer simply a mother and her son's friend waiting in the same house. Something was shifting, subtle but undeniable. At one point, our knees brushed lightly. Neither of us moved. The contact was small, accidental on the surface, but when she didn't pull back, the warmth of it spread through me like a secret I wasn't supposed to hold. I told myself it was harmless. That we were just talking. That I was just keeping her company. But as the minutes stretched and the silence between words grew deeper, I couldn't escape the feeling that we were both aware of the same truth, that my friend being late had changed the evening into something neither of us had expected, and neither of us wanted to end too quickly. Eventually, I realized how long I had been there. The conversation had stretched far past what I expected, and though my friend still hadn't arrived, the hour was growing late. I shifted slightly on the sofa, trying to shake the weight of time pressing down on the evening. I should probably get going, I said at last, though even as the words left my mouth, I wasn't sure if I wanted to. Her eyes lifted to mine. There was the faintest hesitation in them, as though she, too, felt the reluctance of letting the night end. But she nodded softly, her voice calm. Of course. Let me walk you to the door. We rose almost in unison, the cushions releasing our shapes, the room suddenly feeling larger, emptier, without us seated close together. She walked beside me down the hallway, her steps unhurried, each one echoing lightly against the wooden floor. I noticed the subtle brush of her shoulder against mine as we passed through the narrow space, and though it might have been accidental, she didn't pull away. At the door, she paused. Her hand rested on the handle, but she didn't open it right away. Instead, she turned slightly, so that we were facing one another in the small glow of the porch light. For a moment, we simply stood there. Her hand was close enough that I could see the faint shimmer of her wedding band, though I knew she hadn't worn it in years, and I wondered what memories it still carried for her. Thank you, she said quietly, her voice almost lost in the stillness. For what? I asked, my own tone hushed, as if the house itself might overhear us. For tonight. For staying. There was a pause. The kind of pause that holds a decision inside it. Her eyes searched mine, steady but unreadable, her breath just a whisper against the space between us. I could smell the faint sweetness of her shampoo, see the way a single strand of hair had fallen across her cheek. And then it happened, not a kiss, not anything so bold, but something that felt even more intimate. She leaned in, close enough that I could feel the warmth of her cheek, close enough that her hair brushed lightly against my shoulder. My breath caught, and for a heartbeat, I thought the world might stop. Her lips hovered near my ear, and in the softest, most careful whisper she said, "Don't tell him you stayed longer." The words sank into me, carrying more weight than they should have. They weren't a comment, not exactly. They were confession. A secret meant only for me. When she drew back, her expression was calm again, but her eyes held something unspoken, something fragile and powerful all at once. I nodded faintly, unable to find words, and she gave me a small smile, the kind that seemed both relieved and uncertain. And then, with a gentle motion, she opened the door, letting the cool night air rush in, breaking the spell without undoing it. The cool night air rushed against my face as soon as the door opened, carrying with it the faint scent of damp earth and garden flowers. I stepped out onto the porch slowly, almost unwillingly, my chest still tight from her whisper. Behind me, the warm glow of the living room spilled through the doorway, casting her silhouette in soft light. For a moment, neither of us moved. I stood on the edge of the porch, my hands stuffed awkwardly into my pockets, while she lingered just inside, one hand resting lightly against the doorframe. It felt as though the night itself was holding its breath, waiting to see what either of us might do next. I turned slightly, my eyes meeting hers one last time. There was something in the way she looked at me, not regret, not quite, but a quiet acknowledgement. A recognition that tonight had crossed some invisible line, even if neither of us had stepped all the way across it. "Good night," I said softly, my voice rougher than I expected. Her lips curved into the faintest of smiles, and though it was small, it was steady. "Good night," she replied, her voice carrying just enough warmth to make me feel it settle deep inside me. I stepped down onto the path leading to the street, the gravel crunching beneath my shoes. Behind me, I could still sense her presence, still feel the echo of her nearness as if it lingered in the air. I didn't dare look back until I reached the gate. And when I finally did, she was still there, framed by the doorway, her figure lit softly by the light inside. Our eyes met again, from a distance this time. She didn't wave, didn't say another word. She simply stood there, watching. And then, slowly, she closed the door. The click of the latch was gentle, but it felt final, like the end of a chapter I hadn't realized I was reading. The walk home felt longer than usual. Each step carried the memory of her touch on my hand, the warmth of her laughter, the whisper of her voice against my ear. I told myself not to read too much into it, not to carry it further than it was meant to go. But no matter how much I tried, I couldn't escape the truth that the evening had changed something inside me. It was not about desire, not in the way people might think. It was about connection, fragile, unexpected, and quietly powerful. The kind of connection that sneaks up on you and leaves you wondering why it feels both so right and so impossible. By the time I reached my place, the night had grown darker, the air cooler. I paused at the door, pulling out my keys, and found myself smiling faintly despite everything. Her words echoed in my mind once more, softer now, like a secret I wasn't sure I was supposed to keep. Don't tell him you stayed longer. And even though I knew tomorrow would return everything to its ordinary rhythm, tonight would remain, etched quietly in memory, in silence, in the space between what was said and what was left unsaid. If this story touched you, don't forget to like the video and subscribe for more slow burn romance stories. Share your thoughts in the comments. Would you have told your friend or kept her secret?